I just ran into something dangerous that beginners might not notice. Even professionals might miss it if it's hidden or they're just not paying attention. I know what kind of damage something like this can do. I know someone who got really messed up by getting hit by one of these, which is the spring pole. When the tree fell, it bent over this oak pole. What do you think would happen if someone was cutting off this limb and they cut into the pole and cut it off? All the tension in that pole, it's going to spring right back up at the operator. And when it does it, it's probably not going to be slow and gentle about it. Assuming it still has a lot of spring left in it, it can come back at you with a whole lot of oomph. It could hit you directly. It could fling something up at you that could hit you. It could push your spinning chain into your wherever. Either way, it's really going to hurt, which reminds me of what Daffy Duck once said about that. I don't like pain. It hurts me. There's also what Donald Duck said, which I think was something more like, this one was easy to see because it's on the part of the tree that doesn't have many limbs on it. It was out in the open. A lot of times this can happen more toward the top of the tree where all the limbs are. Except in this case, I cut them all off, which doesn't give us a very good visual, but sometimes something like this is hard to see because there's a lot of limbs around from the tree you just cut down. I think the safest way to disable this would be to cut it on this end and disable the spring. And with a longer bar, how about that? You can stand back and stay out of its reach. But that wouldn't be any fun, so let's cut off the other end, see what this thing's capable of. This might be a little bit disappointing because I cut this tree down a couple months ago. This is already starting to bud and grow. It may have had enough time to get accustomed to being in this position, so it might not fling up and be as dramatic as it could otherwise be. It might be a non-event. Just in case it decides to put on a show for us, let's cut it off and watch. It's still rising slowly. Okay, I don't think this thing could have done a better job at contradicting the whole point I'm trying to make here. After I cut that off, I went to go have lunch and take a little time to reflect on some of my life choices, like my choices in visual aids. Who chose this to be the specimen for an example of something springing back really quickly and dangerously? By the time I got back from lunch, it had slowly made its way all the way back up here. I just had to pick the one spring pole in the world that springs back slowly and gently. Really, it's not usually like this. These can spring back really fast and do a lot of damage. I think the moral of this story is don't wait 2 months to do the video after knocking one of these down, after it starts growing itself into that position. Otherwise, it'll be a complete disaster of a video. Never mind this one, just imagine what something like this could do if it still had a lot of spring left in it, or if it was a larger pole that got bent over and you released the tension on it. Anytime you're working with heavy objects in the woods, like a tree that's fallen or has moved, watch out for anything that could have developed spring in it that might be released when you cut it off. Sometimes it might be the tree you're working on that has the spring, or a branch or a limb on that tree. When you cut it off, the spring is released. Unfortunately, I don't have a visual aid to show you today, so we'll move on to the next danger, which is being in the bite of the line, something you want to avoid. Right now, I am in the bite of the line. I don't have a lot of tension on it right now, so it's not a real danger, but the bite, there's B-I-G-H-T, which I think is a specific type of situation. Loggers often use B-I-T-E, which just means being in an area where the line could get you if something went wrong. I've seen both used. I'm not going to get into the specifics of the differences and which one's correct, mostly because I'm not exactly sure. But I like to think of it as being in a position where the line could bite you if something went wrong. Just looking at this gives me discomfort because my dad taught me at a very young age to stay out of this spot. I don't have much tension on here right now, just enough to hold that up, so I'm not in real danger here. Although the way things have been going today with visual aids, maybe I better stand back a bit. We have the winch pulling that way, the logs pulling that way. If the cable or chain, or in this case a strap, broke, if some of the hardware on the block broke or came loose, this heavy chunk of steel, along with the line and maybe even the chain or whatever it's attached to the tree with, is going to spring back into this area. If it hits you, it's really going to cause a lot of pain. And you know what Daffy and Donald said about pain. It could also be a lot worse than pain. You might never feel pain again if it hits you. Depending on whose definition of bite of the line you want to use, today the definition I'm using is any location around the line where you have a higher probability of pain or death happening in the unfortunate event that the unfortunate happens. If you get out of this zone into this side of the line or that side of the line, I think you're a lot safer than you are in there. But there are still dangers here. If the line broke here at the log, which is one of the more common places for them to break, it could fling right back at you, or anywhere within a certain angle, either direction. Anywhere over there, you're in the danger zone, which includes back here, a certain distance over here and a certain distance over here. Same if it broke on the winch side, it could fling back that way. You don't want to be back here where the line could come flinging back this way. There's also a certain scenario where the line could break, then come swinging around the block. That would be dangerous. Not a real likely scenario, not likely to happen here, but it can happen. I think the main takeaway here is stay away from lines that are under tension. Really anywhere can be the danger zone. What about a piece of equipment where the operator sits? You're going to be right in line with the danger zone. That is a concern. A lot of equipment has a screen back here. I think the newer winches come with a guard. A lot of times I use this winch as a stationary yarder. In that case, I typically stand out here to operate it, which puts me a little more out of the danger zone, but not completely out. One of the reasons I'm semi-okay with that is I use an extra heavy cable compared to what the winch can pull. This winch doesn't pull hard enough to put much stretch into this cable. Anytime I've had it break, it's really been a non-event. The only times I've had it break is when it was old and rusty. There was a spot close to the log end where all the strands, or most of the strands, were frayed. There were only a few holding it, and even under a hard pull when it breaks, there's a little drama at the log end, but here at the tractor, it really doesn't do anything. But even with that said, this is a little bit of a safety design flaw. It would be good to have a safety screen on here. If I had a 1/2 inch cable on here, or especially a 3/8 inch cable that this tractor could really stretch and even break, that would be scary. I wouldn't want to be anywhere near here. Some people like to use something like a coat to drape over the line. The idea here is, if it breaks, the weight of the coat will direct the line down toward the ground, where the ground will slow it down if it tries to fling back. You see this a lot with people using something like a pickup or a Jeep winch, where they don't want the line to come flying through the windshield if it breaks. I've never actually tested this to see how it works, but probably not a bad idea. When it comes to lines under tension, I think the best thing you can do is stay a safe distance away from them. Now on to the next potential danger that I see a lot of people not paying enough attention to, and that is log decks. This is a pretty pathetic, small, jumbled up log deck, but the way things are going with visual aids today, I think this one fits just fine into this video. As a young kid, one of the things my dad taught me was stay away from log decks. You have all these round objects that are piled on top of each other, some of them piled really high. That is not a kid's play toy. It's also not something for adults to be around without being on guard, because we all know what could happen when you have round objects piled on top of each other. There was an event, I think it was in 1999, I looked it up a while ago, I think I remember that right. It was in Texas. It might have been a college kid event. They had this huge deck of logs. I think they were going to light it on fire for some event. I may not have all the details right, but the point is they were climbing on it, it collapsed, it killed and injured a bunch of people. I remember thinking, it's unfortunate nobody told them, stay away from log decks. A few weeks ago, I was watching the TV series Landman. It had an incident on there where a load of pipe rolled over and killed a guy. It was tragic, but it was a good illustration of what can happen when you stack round things on top of each other. As I am standing here and walking on this deck of logs, I put the logs here. I know which ones are stable, which ones are not. Okay, I'm being a bad example. Sometimes I'll see where someone will get a log truck load of firewood logs delivered. They'll put them into a big deck. Then I'll see the person out there with a chainsaw bucking off rounds in the big log deck. You'll probably get away with that. Most people do, but there's a lot of potential for disaster to happen when you're doing that in a log deck. If you want to be safe about it, pull the logs out of the deck, then cut them up. I know it's nice to be able to cut them up off the ground, up in the pile. Just be aware of the potential risks that could be disastrous. If you ever see any kids climbing on that pile, I don't care if they're your own kids. In that case, it's okay to tell someone else's kids to get off of that pile. One way to think about large, very heavy round objects piled on top of each other like a log deck is they are typically made by equipment. Then later they are disassembled by equipment, while the operator is safely seated in the cab of that equipment. Log decks are for equipment to be around and manipulating. They are not for people to be around and manipulating. Well, let's move on to the next potential danger that I think a lot of people are not that aware of how dangerous it can be, and that is the Gill Poke. For that, we have this visual aid, which will hopefully work out better than the first one. If you imagine you're in this tractor, you're driving it forward, and there's this stick out here. Pretend it's stationary and the tractor's moving. It can slide along here without any real problem. Imagine instead of hitting it at this angle, it was to hit it at this angle. Imagine this end being up against something solid or still connected to its own roots. If a piece of equipment or a vehicle or anything was to hit this from this direction, that's going to jam right up into the engine. Or for example, if it hit here, this could very quickly bend, develop a lot of spring, break off, then the rest of it could fly right up into the operator. And that would be really bad, and it wouldn't even have to have that spring thing happening. The thing about the Gill Poke is they can happen so quickly. And again, we're assuming you're driving the tractor forward and this is stationary and the tractor hits this. This could be down in the brush, hidden. It could easily puncture a tire. Or imagine you're in a pickup truck. This is the part that's right here behind the door, or where the door is, the window hits the door. What if that part of it just hits a stick just enough at an angle where it shoves that stick right into your cab? It'd be a lot better if I had a pickup truck here to show it, but it's way over there. Okay, I decided to take one for the team and walk all the way up here so I can show you what I'm talking about. If you're driving and you hit a branch like this, it's just going to rub by your vehicle without a problem. But if it hits you at this angle, say you didn't see it or you thought it was going to miss you and it gets snagged on here, this is going to push it inward, and this thing will very quickly cause a big problem for you. You can also be Gill poked by a larger object like these logs. Imagine the other ends are immovable. Bring a piece of equipment along and it hits one of these logs at this angle. As it pushes the log around, the log's going to be pushing into the machine. It could break something, it could push something over. If you're on a side hill and you hit a Gill Poke just right, it could be enough to flip a piece of equipment over. You have to watch out for things that could be sticking out at you at that kind of an angle. Again, one of the big dangers of the Gill Poke is how quickly it can happen. Because of the geometry, the way things are oriented, there's an acceleration here. It can happen so quickly, the damage can be done before you even realize what's happening. I'll show you one more potential danger with the line, mostly because I want to see if I can get one of my visual aids to actually work today. Try to end things on a positive note. I'll release the tension. Imagine this is somebody standing here. Must be drunk, they're having a hard time standing up. Catch your balance, guy. We have our line attached to something back here. Now we start pulling on it. Which brings me to some basic working in the woods safety advice I'll leave you with, which is pay attention to what's going on, watch out for things, be safe out there.